All right, well, I will go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for attending. My name is Chris Hines. I'm the Director of Global Technical Support for ProSoft. And what we are talking about today is our EtherNet IP to Modbus TCP IP to OPC UA Server Gateway. And what I'll go through today is I'll walk through an OPC primer. So kind of give you an update, not really an update, but talk about how OPC came to be, what it was, what it is, and talk about the differences between OPC Classic and OPC UA. And the next three things, other than the questions, will be really brief. I'll give you a brief product overview. Actually, I take that back. The product overview is going to be very brief. The live walkthrough will be basically what I'm going to focus on. But before I get started, I'm just going to double check just to make sure everybody can hear me. And if somebody could just reply in the chat, because these things you never know. I see my microphone is working, but and great. Thanks, Brian. All right. Loud and clear. Got it. Okay. So the history of OPC. So back in 1995, a couple automation vendors got together because they wanted a way to what they thought was going to be easily allow their devices to communicate. And so what they did is they formed a coalition between these different vendors, and they came up with OPC, which originally stood for OLE for process control. The OLE stood for object linking and embedding. And now it just stands for OPC. If you ask anyone from the OPC organization, that's what they'll tell you. But yeah, so they got together and they realized along the way between 1995 and 2004, they realized that they need something more. And we'll talk about a little bit of the shortcomings here in just a minute. And so they formed OPC UA, OPC Unified Architecture. And now we refer to the original OPC as OPC Classic. And in 2006, OPC was released. And in 2015, a really interesting thing happened between the PI group, which is I don't know if they refer to themselves as the PI group anymore. It's the Profibus Profinet International Group and the OPC Foundation. They got together and formed a coalition to help benefit users who are interested in IoT and those sort of things. And by the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. I know everybody's muted right now, but yeah, please type them in and I will get to them at the end. Okay, so OPC UA and OPC Classic. So the first three bullet points there are common between the two, so I won't really focus on those. But secure access. With OPC Classic, you really didn't have a whole lot of security. There was some security built into DCOM, but not a whole lot. And with OPC UA, there's all sorts of security. Security as far as exchanging certificates, user level permissions, and that sort of thing. OPC Classic originally was, you can get it through firewalls, but it was tough. And you know, as long as you had the correct ports to forward, you could get it through firewalls, but it wasn't very friendly. It wasn't very easy to do so. OPC UA is a lot easier to get through firewalls, primarily because one of the protocols it uses is the same protocol that your browser uses HTTP. So that's one of the reasons it's so firewall friendly. The common interface, I kind of like it because when you go from the different clients and configuring the different devices, a lot of the interfaces are the same. Whereas you define a server, you have a list of tags. I mean, until you've done it, it's very similar, very common. And the reason that we're allowed to, or not allowed, we're able to use it on our gateways, which run an embedded Linux operating system, is because it's OS platform independent. With the original OPC Classic, it used a service called DCOM, which was a Windows-only service. So you couldn't really run it. I know there were ways to run it on embedded operating systems by using proxies and that sort of thing, but OPC UA is easily ran on systems other than Windows, which kind of is the same thing for embedded device operation. So that's it between OPC Classic and OPC UA. Now let's talk a little bit about OPC UA, so OPC primer. So here's a typical shop pyramid or factory pyramid of your controllers there in the midsection, communicating to the factory floor. So communicating to all the factory floor devices, whatever they may be. And let's say you have different vendors with different controllers, and how do these different vendors communicate together if they don't have a common protocol? Well, a lot of us, we know we can use gateways for that. Regarding Schneider and Rockwell, yeah, they both support Ethernet IP, but one thing that processors inherently don't support is OPC UA. So to get OPC UA up to the cloud, from the shop floor to the top floor, you would use something like this gateway. And what it allows you to do is now it allows not only for the controllers to communicate together, but it allows you to communicate OPC up to the top floor, up to the cloud, or what have you, with a built-in OPC server. Now, what is this gateway? What does it do? Everything you see on the left there, it does all that simultaneously. This really is a unique gateway in the market. I mean, there's hundreds of OPC UA gateways to Ethernet IP, Modbus, TCP, what have you. But I haven't found any that does all this simultaneously. There are some that you can configure as an Ethernet IP server. You can configure it as a client. Same with Modbus TCP. But I haven't seen any that offer 8 Class 1 IO server connections, along with the Class 3 connections. So Class 3 basically means that it can issue a message instruction, just like a controller, issues a message instruction to a PLC. It can receive Class 3 messages, and the Class 1 basically means that it supports the implicit messaging. Modbus TCP, you can connect, it has 10 individual client connections. Each client connection can communicate with up to 100 different devices, or 30 different devices. And it supports 10 server connections. So you can have 10 devices create a connection to the gateway. And as far as OPC UA goes, it supports 10 server connections. So you can have 10 clients connect to it. And the tag limit, that's kind of misleading there, 64K tag limit. We have 8K of memory, so 8 kilobytes of memory for tags. So if you had all bool tags, then yeah, you could have 64,000 tags. It supports, as far as security, it supports signed, encryption and signed, and none. Browse, read, and subscription timestamp and diagnostics. And as you get, I know there are some of you that are probably a little unfamiliar, kind of new to OPC UA, and as you get to using it, a lot of this stuff will make more sense. And we'll talk about that in a minute when we do some of the configuration. This screen is a little bit redundant, kind of showing the same stuff I just showed. And I think that is it for this section. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the configuration. So here I have a gateway already configured, that really doesn't help. I'm going to configure one from scratch. So just before I get too ahead of myself, this software package is called ProSoft Configuration Builder. And ProSoft Configuration Builder is a free utility that we use to configure a number of our products, actually most of our products other than wireless. And any gateway that we have, any device that we have that requires ProSoft Configuration Builder, it'll be in the download section on the web tab. And so that's it. So PCB for short, ProSoft Configuration Builder. So when the application first starts, if you haven't already created an application, it'll walk you through and let you create a new application. So right now, I'm going to go choose module type. So I right click, choose module type, and then I'm going to choose the PLX30 line of products. And these are the different gateways for the PLX30s. And then the EIP TCP UA Gateway. Select it. And then I already had one, so it just added a extension onto the name. These are all the different parameters. Depending on what you're doing, with the gateway. I know there's probably not a whole lot of applications where Ethernet IP, Modbus TCP, and OPC UA will be used at the same time. And typically it'll probably be one, either Modbus TCP or Ethernet IP. So depending on your application, you may not have to do a whole lot in here. For instance, if you have a Logix processor or even a PLC5 or SLIC issuing messages to the gateway to retrieve OPC UA Gateway, then there is absolutely nothing you need to do in the Ethernet IP side, because it's automatically an Ethernet IP server. So there's nothing you need to do on the Ethernet IP side. Same for the Modbus TCP side. If you have Modbus TCP devices or PLCs issuing messages to our server, then there's nothing you need to do on the Modbus TCP server side. There are things you can do, for instance, on the Modbus TCP servers. There are a few things you can do for the data mapping. So if you want to put some offsets, you could do that. And same thing with the Class 3 server. The Class 3 server is what they call a file size. For those that are familiar with the way SLICs and PLC5s have their files named, I don't think SLICs, but PLC5s can go up to 1,000 as far as the file size. You can have n:10/99/999, whereas, or actually, yeah, no, it'd be n10:999, whereas the PLCs or SLICs don't support that. So that's why we kind of default to 100. Anyway, enough of that. So for the configuration, I really don't need to do anything on the Ethernet IP side. What I'm going to show you is I'm going to be using the Class 1 connections, and I'm going to just be using the default connections that we have defined. So these are defined straight out of the box. So I'm not going to touch those, don't need to do anything. What I do need to do is you have to specify an IP address. And since this is our PLX32, the PLX32 is designed for unique subnets. So you have different vendors bring in their different devices, or actually protocols. You might want Modbus TCP IP and Ethernet IP on different subnets. So that's what the PLX32s are for. So for the configuration, I double click on OPC UA, choose yes, it's going to add it to the devices. And then there are 3 steps. We actually have a walkthrough on our webpage. And the walkthrough talks you through configuring your different certificates. So for instance, you would create an application instance certificate, a CA certificate, and create an application instance certificate. The difference is that provisioning certificate lets us create certificates and sign them. And this is the CA certificate that gets signed. And then it also creates an application instance certificate. Every software package has an application instance certificate, and that is where you share it with the device that you're communicating with or software that you're communicating with. And in the certificates, when you create all their certificates, what you'll need to do is you need to share their certificates with other devices or other software packages that you're communicating with. So for instance, you see right here, I have a certificate that I imported from this software package called Unified Architecture UA. It's a UA Expert. It's a free client utility that allows us to test the OPC UA communications. And so what I do in the certificates is I take this certificate and I import it in here using the import button. So I can click import, browse to where the tag is, select it, and then import it. I already have it imported, so I don't need to do it again. And then once it's imported, once your certificates are created, this gets downloaded to the gateway. Now the gateway has a copy of this certificate, and it knows that this software package is allowed to communicate with me. So then once all those are created, and we have a default set of tags that we created in the gateway, And I'll show you those in just a minute, but these are kind of nice because in the gateway, you can actually get this status information automatically, just to show you that your gateway is quickly up and running, or your OPC UA is communicating correctly. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the actual application. That's pretty much it on the configuration. Like I say, our walkthrough does a really good job at walking you through creating your certificates, sharing them with the other device, and so on. So this is the one we're communicating with right now, and I will show you that. So what I've done is I've actually mapped in 2 gateways. I have one that's using no security, and I have another one that's using the maximum security, so it's signing and encryption. And I'm communicating with the gateway. Right, you can see the values updating right there. And what I'm going to do now, I showed you the OPC UA side. Now I'll show you the Ethernet IP side. So here's Logix. Here's the fresh new Logix 30 version, Logix Designer 31. So I'll create a new project. I'll call this UA demo. Click next, finish. And one thing you'll notice that when you plug this into the network, if it's on the correct IP address, you'll notice that it has a yellow exclamation point, yellow exclamation mark. And I've already done it. Like this had a yellow exclamation mark. You can right click and you can upload the EDS directly from the device. So there's nothing you have to do as far as the using the EDS import wizard, anything like that. Okay, so once you've imported the EDS, it'll be in your list. It'll take a minute to update, but it'll be in the list of modules for that communicate on Ethernet. And real simply, I'm just going to type in PLX. These are a list of some of the other gateways we have, or actually that I've used with the Ethernet IP. So this is the OPC UA Gateway, and I will hit create. I will give it a name. And my IP address on this guy is 192.168.22. I don't remember. So I'll go back over here, 22.79. Okay, so that's it. This supports 8 I/O connections. Right now, I'm going to change it. I'm actually going to add one more connection. It's that easy to add an I/O connection. So now this is going to support 248 words of data. And what I'll do now is I'll click OK. Now it's created. You can modify the RPI time if needed. Maybe you have status information that you don't need to update as often as, say, process data. So you can have unique RPIs for the different connections. All right, so that is created. And guess what? We're done. So now I'm just going to go ahead and download this to my processor. Let's go. So this is my processor right there. Download. And once this downloads, I'll walk you through getting the data exchange between OPC UA and Ethernet IP. And what I'll also do is, I hadn't planned on this, but why not? I'll go ahead and do it. I'll show Modbus TCP IP as well. Okay, place package run. First thing you notice, there's no exclamation. I know for those of you who have used I/O before and adding Ethernet devices to the tree, that dreaded yellow exclamation, man. Okay, so there's no yellow exclamation. And then what I can do is I can go to my controller tags and excuse me, in my output, what I'll do is I created a tag already for this guy. It is what I created EIP address 0, just to show you the address 0. So I can go over here and I can type track this down. 1, 2, 3, 4 into there. And you see that show up? So how did I do that? Well, I can go into here and I'll show you how to create tags. So there's my EIP address 0. We'll add. I'll give it a name. I'll call it EIP address 1. I'm just going to create one for now. You see the little pop-up? You can actually create multiple variables if you wanted to. And there's also an import and export option too. So once you create the variables, you can export them to see the format that it's in. And then what you can do is you can create your own variables, use that same format and import it. Int 16, the address is 2001. Okay, so that's the address in the module that it's using. And the reason it's using 2001, you can look back here in the class 1 connections, and you can see that the output data starts at address 2000. So 2001, click OK. So that's in there. And you'll notice I didn't put it in a folder name. So these are in folders, their own folders. These two are not. And then I'll download this. And what this is telling me, this is a little warning that pops up. I'm using the default username. So it's admin12345 is the password. And so it's just giving me a warning saying, hey, you're using the default stuff. You might want to secure it. So that's just all that it's doing. So and hopefully everything goes right. And what we'll do is we'll see this. I'll refresh the OPC UA client, and we'll see that updated tag come in, and then I'll map it over. And then after that, I will pop open. In fact, I'll do that right quick. Well, this is downloading the tag. Connect with ModScan 32. And we're at address 2001. But we are cool. Input registers. So there's my value that I typed in earlier. Now this guy should be done. Okay, so we're good there. I'll go back to the OPC client. I will refresh it. There's my tag. I'll drag it over. And then we'll add a value to it. And we'll call it 3. And also in Modbus TCP IP, we get the value. So that's it on the configuration of this gateway. There's so many things that I obviously didn't cover. For instance, creating class 3 IO connections. So for instance, if you had a older PLC 5, older SLIC that you wanted to issue message instructions, you don't want to touch the ladder, don't want to modify anything in your PLC, well, we can generate those messages as well. So you don't have to modify any ladder, anything, and we can read and write to PLC 5s and that sort of thing. And the same with Modbus TCP IP. Say you have, say you had a PLC that supports Modbus TCP IP. You can't modify the code, but you know which Modbus registers to read and write. We need to read and write from. Well, we can issue messages or commands, function codes to connect to those different Modbus TCP servers. And that wraps it up. There's a I keep saying wraps it up, and then I see this. There's a thing called data map. What this is doing, this allows you to map data from one position to another. For instance, what I'm doing now is I'm mapping diagnostic data, which is the data you see here. I'm mapping that diagnostic data into an address that I'm able to read from on the PLC. Okay. So back to the PowerPoint. Let me go ahead and run this right quick. Okay. So what we did is we went over adding the connections, modifying the RPIs, and it's really kind of, you saw how easy it was. It's super simple to do. One thing that we are going to work on doing is getting different devices get shipped to us periodically, and what we do is we create custom AOIs for them. So for instance, a Ethernet IP gateway talking to Modbus flow meters. And we're creating AOIs for those. So basically you drag in the AOI and that's it. Everything gets mapped in perfectly. The OPC UA configuration manager, it has a really intuitive design, I think. There are some steps that you know, in our walkthrough kind of walks you through it, that really need to be followed as far as creating the certificates. And you'll get some errors when you try to create a certificate. You'll try to create a certificate before you've created a certificate authority, for instance. I really like the fact that you get live diagnostic status. I'll show that in just a minute. I didn't cover that. And creating the provisioning certificates, or certificate provisioning. It allows you to import, export. It's a really clean, really easy way to do it. And one thing you'll notice, when you create their certificates, there's some fields that you can add, or you can define rather. These are not mandatory. So when you create an application certificate or CA authority certificate, you don't need to create all this or specify all this information, but we just do an example. And then the configuration. One thing I really like about this configuration utility, and I wish we would do it more often, is, and there's several software packages that do this as well in our industry, where it has the live help. So you go to a field, you just hover over the field, and it tells you exactly what to do. And that's one thing I'll show again. I'll show in a minute. I really like that. So if you're not sure about what something is, we have the live help that I really like. And the different certifications. So what I'll do now is real quickly, I will go back here and show you what I was talking about as far as diagnostics goes. The gateway, all of our gateways have really good diagnostics to them, both as far as the different protocols they use, but as well as for the gateway itself. So we can go on and we can take a look at all sorts of things as far as diagnostics go. Let's say, for instance, you are passing this value 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not showing up here, right? So what you can do is you can go into the diagnostics, and I can go here just to see if it's getting to the gateway or not. I can go to address 2000. I can see my values right there. So I know it's getting into the gateway. So that means something else is wrong, and it's not the Ethernet IP side. So what we can do is also in the OPC UA side, say if you created this tag at address 2000, and say it's a write tag, so OPC UA is writing the value, same's true for that. So you can go check the database. If the value is there, then you know that the problem isn't the OPC UA side, it's the Ethernet IP side or Modbus TCP side. And in the diagnostics, you have diagnostics and status information for every one of the communication drivers. And right now it shows you that these are actively communicating with an RPI of 10 milliseconds. And the configuration up here shows you the status of the OPC UA server. And then one thing, if you ever call into support, we'll ask you is, we'll definitely want to know the firmware revision level. So yeah, so it has some really good diagnostics. And another cool thing is you can actually log this to a file. And when you log it to a file, just click the email to support. And this is a VM that doesn't have Outlook or an email service on it, so I get an error when I click that. But when you click that, if you have Outlook or some other type of email service, it'll actually create an email with the attached file of everything you did while you were in the diagnostics. And that, my friends, is it. So what I'll do now is I'll go look back to see if we have any questions. Okay, so let's go to chat. I see no questions. Well, if anybody has any questions, our website is prosoft-technology.com, and feel free to contact your local sales rep. Feel free to contact me directly. My email address, I believe, was in the invite, and you can always email info@prosoft-technology.com. And again, that's it. If you have any questions, please let us know.